and it looks like we are ready to go. We are Makoko. We're going to toss it back on over to Kaʻiu and her esteemed panel joining us this morning. Aloha e Kaʻiu.
Aloha ho, mahalo nui e moani. Really excited to introduce our next panel of speakers who have been participating in Āhua He Inoa since it began in 2017. And so, after the naming of Oumuamua, there was a global receptivity to that name that caused a lot of conversation around the name itself, the language that it is in, and the perspective that it has come from. And so, like Larry mentioned in the video, how we perpetuate and create avenues for our next generation, our keiki, our haumana, to continue in this effort and in this tradition, we began the Āhua He Inoa program, and so our initiative. And so after Oumuamua, again, like the video mentioned, Kamo'oalewa, Ka'epo'oka'abela, two names created by high school students from both Hawaii Island and Maui Island, as well as some of our university students here at Hilo. These names went on and actually got official adoption and recognition by the International Astronomical Union, an international body that officially records and documents these discoveries. And so it was a major nod, I would say, to our haumana that spent their time, energy, expertise in putting those names together, and it was a great recognition of their work. Those two names are the only names recorded in the archives of astronomy in both English and Hawaiian. There's no other indigenous language recorded in those official archives. So we're very proud of that, and we want to continue to push the envelope, not just for us here in Hawaii, but for indigenous peoples around the world. After Kamo'oalewa, Ka'epo'oka'abela, other names came out. Powehi, the first imaged black hole. Poniua'ena, a massive quasar nearly 13 billion years old. Lelea Kuhonua, dwarf planet orbiting our sun that takes over 32,000 years for it to come around again. And many more conversations that were a part of the creation of these names, all of which have been officially adopted, either by the IAU or by the scientific research teams that made these discoveries. So here to share a bit about their experiences in the Āhua He Inoa program, and specifically around these names as well, are our next panel members, which I will introduce and hand over to them. So I want to introduce Ms. Kanoe Kanakaʻole. She is a kama of Nā Honua o Piʻilani of the island of Maui, raised in a large extended family. Kanoe's roots connect her to Lahaina, Ulupalakua, and Waiohinu Ka'u. But today she calls Ola'apuna her home. She is a practitioner of hula and enjoys spending time outdoors with her ohana. Kanoe is a Hawaiian medium educator, formerly at the Ahapunana Leo and now at Kahakaʻula o Keʻelikōlani College of Hawaiian Language. Aloha nui e Kanoe. We also have Dr. Alan Tokunaga, who was born and raised on Maui and went to Baldwin High School. He got interested in astronomy while he was in high school and so went on to college with this in mind. After getting his doctorate in astronomy from the State University of New York at Stony Brook, he did postdoctoral work in California and Arizona before returning home to Hawaii to work for the Institute for Astronomy in 1980. His specialty is in infrared astronomy and building instruments, and he retired from the IFA in 2016. Aloha nui e Alan.
Thank you.
We also have Bruce Torres Fischer, who is a master's student at Kahakaʻula o Keʻelikōlani. He works on the Kani'aina Digital Oral History Project, preserving the Leo Kupuna, or ancestral voices of the Hawaiian language. And he spends his time creating educational content with a focus on the revitalization of Olelo Hawaii, while also promoting a broader understanding and consciousness of Hawaiian culture throughout our diverse island community. So aloha nui ya'oi e Bruce, ya'oko e kolu no ho'i. The first question I want to ask is really just broad in general, but how did you learn and or develop perhaps a new understanding or a new relationship to traditional Hawaiian knowledge, and also to astronomical discoveries and scientific inquiry being done here in Hawaii? Kanoe?
Well, I have a friend named Kaʻiu Kimura who tends to give me a lot of phone calls and requests to come and participate in her crazy ideas. But actually, being a part of the Hawaiian medium education program for as many years as I have, one of the wonderful things about education is you're not limited to just knowledge systems in a particular discipline or just one arena. You have to branch yourself out and explore things that are, find things that are relevant to not just our culture, but the contemporary usage and put into practice in daily life. And so as a Hawaiian medium educator, ʻUla is very much instrumental in pushing us out of our comfort zones and connecting with groups like the Ahuahei Noa Project or ʻImiloa to further expand our knowledge system and the use of language in various contexts.
And what was it like for you coming together with experts from a very different field of, modern astronomical inquiry?
Okay, first was real scary because, I'm actually early medium education. So I'm a preschool teacher by trade. And very intimidated to walk into a room where there's experts in fields of astronomy and science that I don't know nothing about. But what was wonderful is to walk into that room and then to be greeted so warmly and realize that we all come to the table with something to share. No one was made to feel smaller than or bigger than the other. We all came as equals to the table. And that was the first, I guess you could say, icebreaker of our collaboration together.
Awesome, mahalo. And for you, Bruce, being fluent in the Hawaiian language as well and doing the work that you're doing to keep our native speakers' voices, active in today's conversation and having impact on the upcoming generations through the continued exploration of our native speakers. Was there an impact from your perspective on exploring traditional and contemporary thought together, as in your participation of Ahuahei Noa?
Aloha kako ai, mahalo. I think there definitely was. And as Kanoe said, it really pushed all of us as participants to go outside of our comfort zone and both set aside things that we might think and be open. And it was Ahuahei Noa really provided that environment. You can think of it as a petri dish that was just ripe to grow a great culture and a great connection. And interestingly, to answer your question about practicing an Olelo Hawaii, I think so I was one of two Kahakaʻula college students that worked alongside with and also mentored some of the younger students in the program. And I think it really gave us a great opportunity to practice the very Hawaiian tradition of naming. I think that's not something that we get to do every day and that we get to practice. And the younger generation doesn't always get to join people like Larry Kimura and all of the scientists and these experts in their fields. But I think it was a really great opportunity to join with open-minded people. I don't want to say on both sides, but open-minded people in different fields and practice this very traditional Hawaiian loina of naming. And I think today that people, I don't know if everyone does this, but lots of my friends name their cars. It's a thing to name your house. It's a very Hawaiian thing, but it was really cool to be able to not only learn from Larry about naming, the different types of naming traditionally, and also learn from the astronomers about these different celestial objects, and then to really think and connect those two things together. It was both a challenge, but we definitely did it, and we got to learn about science and practice culture and learn, I think, equally about both during this program. I think that was really awesome.
Mahalo, Bruce. And for you, Alan, coming, local boy born and raised here in Hawaii, not necessarily speaking, growing up speaking or being around those who speak or spoke Hawaiian language, but what was it like for you being a co-founder as well as a participant in the ʻAhua He Inoa program for the impact or the observations you had on the astronomy community?
Well, first of all, I'd like to say that I feel honored, very honored to have a chance to work with you and Larry and others, and also with teachers and students at the Hawaiian immersion schools. It's one thing to read about Hawaiian culture, and it's another thing to be immersed in it. And for me, this was a very rewarding and deep experience, emotional even. And to follow up on what Bruce was speaking about, this naming, that in Western science, we're accustomed to naming objects, and it's an identifier, so we don't have to use a strange set of coordinates in the sky to identify the object. We can use a name. We can also name asteroids after people. But the process that we went through in ʻAhua He Inoa was a Hawaiian protocol process of naming, which establishes a relationship between us and the object. And I found that process to be very moving. I was quite touched by it, and it also gave me a much deeper understanding of the connection that is being implied by these protocols between us as human beings and nature. So we have, through this naming process, we have a relationship between us and these objects. They're not simply inanimate objects anymore. They have a name and they have a connection to us. And that's something that you have to experience. It's I don't think you can read about it, of course, but until you experience that, it's very different to experience it and to feel it. So I hope we can continue this kind of program and get more people into this process, so more people can experience and understand the universe from the Hawaiian cultural perspective.
Along those lines, Alan, as we were preparing for today's panel, we had discussions even, about this idea of blending culture and science. And yeah. I think that's the title of our conference, but did you want to share a little bit about what we were talking about in terms of the usage of words that define a relationship between culture and science? Yeah,
maybe I can comment on that. I think Kamala Enos and Doug Simons and others have touched on this. What I'm thinking, when we use the phrase culture and science, it's a little bit dangerous because mentally it may become perceived as culture versus science, and that's not what we want. If we're talking about Hawaiian culture and Western science, I would say that also is a very dangerous way of looking at it. The scientific knowledge is embedded, encoded into the Hawaiian culture and Hawaiian language. So there should be an equality. It's not one versus the other, but it's they're both on an equal plane. And I think that's we should approach the unification of these knowledge systems from that viewpoint, that it's we start from an equal plane. So I would ask people to reconsider the phrase culture and science and think about it at a deeper level. And I think the word blending is also a little bit dangerous in the sense that if we have equal Hawaiian culture as being equal to Western culture, we don't want to dilute Hawaiian culture by blending. But at the same time, we can learn from both sides and come up with something better. So those are my thoughts on the words that we use, and perhaps we should be a little bit more thoughtful about how we can't avoid. We have to use words, and and we can't avoid some misunderstandings. But I think trying to think about it at a deeper level would be good as we go forward.
Thank you, Alan. Yeah, language in any context is so important in conveying meaning in the connections. And Bruce, you minored in biology, I believe, and majored in Hawaiian language and Hawaiian studies. What are your thoughts on this idea about the use of language to describe the relationship of culture and science?
Yeah, I have a few thoughts on it. I did minor in cell and molecular biology, and I had the wonderful opportunity to work for a couple of years in a lab studying infectious diseases. I had the whole lab coat and the mask and the microscope from head to toe. But I agree with what Alan said. I think historically, right now there's this divide that's hopefully growing smaller with programs like Ahua Hei Noa. But I think there's a separation. Culture's over here, science is over here, and they're different. But historically, if we look at it, kupuna were excellent observers of their environment. And as Doug mentioned, curiosity is what usually drives a scientist today. Whereas before, maybe it was a combination of curiosity and survival. So the kupuna and the people before had to be keen observers and essentially do what science is today. I think it's the same culture and science. That the information is encoded in the culture. It is science, and it was definitely based on years and years and years of observation every day. So in fact, everyone was a scientist back in the day. And today we might have lost touch of that, and over time they've drifted apart and become what seems like two separate things. But if we were to draw a Venn diagram, in the middle where they overlap, there would be many things that are shared in common. And as far as today, I think this blending or this collaboration or trying to look at culture and science is similar. I think it's more of a case of psychology, actually. I think people who study culture and people who are Western scientists have their own cultures and their way of looking at the worlds. And we tend to be in our own box, in our own boxes sometimes, and really focused on what we're doing. I think if we can come out of those boxes, we can talk to each other and realize that there are some things that are in common. What was I going to say? I had something else. Yeah, I think we have more in common than we realize, and that we should come off our boxes. And really, we both spend a lot of time. I think science and culture, we should refer to it as there's so many similarities, and that we actually strive for the same goal. We narrowed down under the microscope or scanning through documents and Hawaiian language newspapers, looking for information that will ultimately make our world a better place, and that we're actually have that same spark of curiosity and are trying to make a difference in our world. I think that we should try and connect more, not only through astronomy, but throughout all the sciences and all the fields. We should get together, especially my biology people out there. Let's go.
Mahalo nui, Bruce. And pigeonholing culture and science as, opposed opposites is really does a disservice to both, right? And so in particular for astronomy in these current times, the difficult issues and the difficult conversations happening right now about Mauna Kea and the further development of astronomy and of the stewardship and management of Mauna Kea. How did this conversation of, the social political issues that we are facing as a community, did this challenge your participation in Ahua Heinoa in any way? We can start with whoever wants to go first. Actually, I'd like to open that up to all of our panelists. Maybe we'll start with Alan, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, I was going to say that when Doug Simons asked me to participate in this, I didn't know what to expect. And I was quite surprised when you suggested that we involve the Hawaiian immersion schools in the naming of the objects. So I have to admit, I was a little apprehensive about how this might work out, but it has been truly one of the most satisfying experiences I've had in my professional life. And to everyone was very welcoming. There was good discussion, I think, of these objects and how to name them. And so, yeah, like I said, I feel very honored to have participated in this process. I hope we can continue and involve more people.
I'll jump in. Yes, I was Kanalua. I had my doubts and feelings before joining the program. And I think I had to put aside my own personal mana'o, my own thoughts and feelings about controversy and specifically Mauna Kea. And for me, the program was about ʻŌlelo Hawaii. I think it's critical as an endangered language as we try to revitalize it. We don't shut doors and we go through all the doors that are open to get ʻŌlelo Hawaii out there, including a collaboration like this. And then while I was in the program and it was going well, I saw that really there was this opportunity for collaboration, not only about ʻŌlelo Hawaii, but creating this dialogue about science and culture. Oh, yeah.
I think too often we take up our some of the more human sides of and allow our emotions to guide all our decision making. I was taught to follow your na'au, and the na'au sometimes is a little bit more objective than the heart. When you think about what was at stake, more than, like Bruce said, more than just the issue of Mauna Kea, but really putting our money where the mouth is. You know, we always say, let's work together. We gotta communicate. We gotta sit at the table. And then when those opportunities arise, sometimes we're still too hot from the issues that are constantly plaguing us. And so, like Bruce, I did have to put a lot of my personal feelings aside. And throughout my experience at Ahua Heinoa, having to watch what was going on the Mauna Kalamai, and seeing our family defending that kupuna, and then here I am at the table with you know, what could be perceived as the other side, the other party. But I mean, that's hard. It's hard. But I'm really selfish. I want to be a good kupuna to my grandchildren. And I want to be able to say that when these opportunities arise, I can listen to my na'au. And my na'au is thousands of years of kupuna telling me the work is not pau. you gotta go to the table. You gotta think, you gotta put your head straight and think about what's best for the future. And bring your mana'o and bring our mana'o, actually, our ike ku'una, our traditional knowledge, to that table in a very forward-moving manner. And that can be difficult, but it can be done, you know. That doesn't mean that I put my kupuna to the side. It means that I'm bringing their mana'o of collaboration, of innovation, of perspective, and lavena or behavior to this discussion, with the hope that it will create a better place and a better future for our children. Mahalo.
Mahalo ya okoa po. And as you were all speaking, I'm thinking and reflecting on, a very famous saying many of us know, makahana ka ike, that in doing, one actually learns the lessons, whether they're being brought forth from the past, engaging today to create new opportunities, new knowledge, new relationships that will ultimately, like you're saying, Kanoe, impact the future. Because, looking at our mo'opuna, our keiki, our mo'opuna, and all those generations to come forward, what are we doing today to ensure pathways for them in their times? Thank you all for sharing that. And I have, what was sort of an aha moment then that you all took away coming at this effort with intrepidations, with concerns, with fear, perhaps with enthusiasm as well? But what was sort of the aha moment for you individually participating in the conversations that transpired through this initiative? I see
big aha was Doug mentioned in the opening with Anakalalale. There are, if you study your origin stories, you will find a lot of connectivity to some concepts and theories in modern science today. And what was beautiful about that is not the fact that it's there is not a surprise. I believe my kupuna smart people, but it gives me comfort and confidence to be able to design curriculum and teach future teachers that we can teach through our mo'olelo, our mo'opa'a Hawaii. Any particular topic, field, discipline that we need to teach, it's there in our mo'opa'a Hawaii. And although we do need to be cognizant of the la'a, or the sacredness of how we view our natural environment, it doesn't mean that we need to be silent about teaching our keiki in Hawaii, not just Hawaiian immersion students, but all keiki in Hawaii, teaching them through a traditional lens. So, I mahalo that. Of course, there were a million other ahas because Larry gave us so much ha'awina to study that I'm still studying it today. The connection in format of how origin stories are created, understanding the deeper relationships between man, akua, and aina. It's endless, but yeah, get plenty ahas.
I enjoyed working with the students and learning alongside them. We had to delve into the kumulipo, into these deep, deep things. We learned about gravitational forces and retrograde orbit. We learned about the 4 types of traditional naming practices. But I think the really beautiful thing is that we applied it. We had to learn about this, I think it was a span of 2 days. Take in all this information. We had one night to sleep on it, and then the next day was all about putting it into practice and really sitting down, doing research, delving into the mo'opa'a, into the documentation, and trying to create a name for these celestial objects. So we got to learn a lot from experts in various fields, but I really like the application because it's one thing to talk about it. It's one thing to talk about revitalization and integrating culture and even practicing the culture. And it's another thing to actually do it. And I think it was really great to see it in these young people. So that was one of my aha moments.
Well, the aha moment for me was at the end of the first workshop that we had, and everybody went out to the back of ʻImiloa to hold on to the pikole, and there was a chant, and the names were called out, and then the pikole was buried in the cave. Then I saw the significance of what we were doing and why this ceremony was so important at the end. It connects us to the objects, to nature, and to the land. And then I still have a long ways to go, but I now began to see what this all means. And so that was the aha moment.
What do you guys see as the potential, the opportunity to continue initiatives like this, where we have, experts from different perspectives coming together to wala'au, talk story, kamaʻilio, learn from one another, and also perhaps to advance and co-create knowledge together? What's the opportunity in that for future generations?
Well, I think the starting point is creating more personal connections. So I think we need to, I'm not sure we can expand very greatly the kind of workshops we've had so far. They're quite intimate and very intense. It takes a lot of time and effort on your part. But if we can have dialogue, have people come together, work together on something, and share things, I think more these personal connections will develop, and things will, various things will blossom, and but so we need to think of ways to provide excuses for people to get together and develop these personal connections.
I definitely think so. We need more excuses. I would like to see those personal connections really are the foundation of everything, especially here in Hawaii. And I would like to see more. I would like to see people coming together at more tables. For example, ecologists, biologists, conservationists. I'd like to see them come to the table more with, just like Ahua Hei Noa, where we have these people from different fields coming together to collaborate. Maybe on, I think tomorrow they'll probably talk about it more about the ahupua'a systems and watershed management, and hopefully we'll hear some interesting things about how the Hawaiian perspective and the lens of traditional land management are intersecting and being applied to in today's time to manage this aina, because it was definitely an effective way. But I'd definitely like to see different fields and all of the sciences and all fields to get Olelo Hawaii in there. And I see that happening too as our younger generation that has been steeped in culture and go to school to learn Western science. And then they also are from those two areas and they start working in these fields in what might be considered Western science. But I think the face is also starting to change here in Hawaii, where we do have this younger generation that's literate in both sides and they make it become one. But I would like to see more excuses for everyone to get together and talk more and do more and practice things.
I really hope that in my lifetime, I see even more Indigenous peoples collaborating and infiltrating the institutions that say they want to collaborate with us, but then, you know, sometimes fall short. And so that authentic connection, I really hope to see in the future, not just for us, Mahawaiʻine, but for Indigenous people around the world, that your knowledge system is proven, and be proud of it, and stand on that kahua, that foundation, and no shame walk into those arenas where you will bring the body, the texture, the heart, the na'au into a practice that we know our kupuna did, and they did it well, and creating that that bridge so that our children's children can feel less encumbered and burdened, and can be free to tap into whatever kind of knowledge they want to tap into it with their own cultural lens. So I like see names in Lakota, in Jemez, in the native indigenous populations in South America. They get plenty telescopes over there too. How much collaboration are we really doing? Are we really just kani and say, oh yeah, indigenous knowledge is nice and indigenous people are smart, but we'll call them when we want them? Or are we saying, bring them to the table, and then as indigenous people, we can walk in there with pride, our head held high and ready to work? So that's what I hope to see in my lifetime. I'm not that young, so I hope it happens soon.
Oh yeah, you are young. And mahalo nui loa ka ko'opiha ia kia mo mana'o a pau. Really appreciate, in all gratitude, all of your mana'o that you shared. Very vai for all of us to hear and reflect on. In closing, Ahua Hei Noa creates or hopes to create a pathway that is ground language and culture at the core of modern scientific practice, melding Indigenous culture and science, both locally and nationally, as well as internationally. This initiative benefits from collaborations in our Hawaii community and sets an example for partnership between other Indigenous cultures and science communities worldwide. Integrating and including an Indigenous perspective and approach, not just for the sake of inclusivity or equity, but to truly enhance the science and inquiry itself, especially when done in and around Native peoples and place. Through this kind of approach, we hope that we can better engage our youth to seek and expand their understanding of sciences around them and the connections therein, grounded in their unique perspectives from their aina or their place. So ahu kupanaha ya Hawaii ʻImiloa, long live Hawaii's legacy of exploration. We thank all of you for being engaged today in our discussion, and I'm going to turn now to some of the questions that have been coming in the chat. So one question that came in, I want to ask this to you, Alan, is, how well are the science participants adapting to this kind of effort?
the science participants. I think Doug and I became fully engaged, and I think Doug feels the same way I do regarding this activity. We haven't expanded it to more scientists, and we should at some point figure out how to do that. I sense a great deal of interest among the scientific community about the issues that we are, discussing. We discussed today. There's great interest, and I think we should take advantage of this to build on it and take it as far as we can in terms of bringing together Hawaiian culture and Western culture, and getting learning from both knowledge systems as equals. So to answer the question, as I said, there's great interest, and we should continue the dialogue. And I think great things can happen if we talk to each other.
Yeah, I remember as a result of the initial kickoff of Ahu'ahi Noa, there were about 111 members of the Hawaii Island astronomy community that enrolled in Hawaiian language courses. They were inspired and impacted by the work and the people like Bruce and Kanoe to learn the code of the Hawaiian worldview through the Hawaiian language. So I think that that's one impact that I've observed from the program itself. Additionally, with the Astro 2020 Decadal Survey just being published and seeing emphasis placed in that massive document of the importance, the critical need for Indigenous communities to be more engaged at all levels, in particular to astronomy. So I hope that that kind of that we're gaining momentum in terms of, I think Kanoe said, infiltrating, right? Where Indigenous peoples and perspectives are no longer, something that is a nice perspective to have, but a requisite involvement and engagement to have. I want to ask another question that came up in the chat as well. How do you, as the panelist, engage through culture and science to navigate what is sacred? Where are we now, and where do we need to be? Who would like to answer from their perspective first?
Okay, Elelevo, how do we navigate what is sacred? Carefully. We look at not just the study of or having discourse about, but taking the steps to prepare yourself. That was something that was really important to our kupuna, to Hawaiian, to all Indigenous people, is when you're going to walk through a process that requires a high level of spiritual awareness, you need to prepare yourself. And taking those steps there, as well as in the as a collective group, looking at different ceremonial aspects of preparation and ho'opuka, to once the work is done, to be able for that work to be released into the cosmos and live. So preparation is one way to navigate things that are sacred. Also being candid with each other in our discussions. Sometimes aspects of names and the stories that they relate to couldn't be looked at very superficially, or just, oh, that's a pretty name. You really had to delve into whether this was the Pono approach, I guess, is one way to put it. And really giving yourself that time, which was very difficult because we're kind of under a gun to produce something in a short period of time, but using those those tried and true methods of being able to reflect and let your kupuna talk to you, let your kupuna talk through you, and trusting in that, and knowing what is appropriate and what is not appropriate. So that's Kalamai, I hope. Oh, there was other part of the question, yeah? Where we are now and where we want to be. I'm gonna be very candid. Ko Hawaii, we're not there yet because we're too busy allowing ourselves to be cluttered with other perspectives and other influences in our life that we forget to quiet ourselves to allow the reflection to happen. So that level of discipline needs to be developed from a very early age. And not saying that when you old, you know, can get them, but you got to work twice as hard to get back to that level of reflection and spiritual awareness, as well as you aware of what's going on your phone and your feed and all of this other kind of stuff that Ho'olu bring. So we have a long way to go as humans to get back to that high level of reflection. Okay, that's all I get.
I just wanted to jump in really quickly and kako what Kanoe said, especially that last part and how we do have a long way to go and there are so many things going on right now. But to answer the first part of the question, I think proceed with caution and know what's right and what's wrong and what's appropriate and what's not. And during Ahua Hei Noa, we were under pressure and I did worry, is what we're making appropriate? Is it the right thing? Is it okay to put these elements in the name? So I think proceed with caution. And also I want to add that this collaboration is very good, but we should proceed with caution and walk a fine line as well. And for the future, ideally, the table and the room that the table is in will be forgotten and erased in a few generations, and it will be commonplace for you to go wherever you go, Hawaii no paha. And doesn't everyone manage their land and research through an indigenous lens? In fact, it might not even be called the indigenous lens in a few generations because it might be the lens. And anyone who doesn't have that isn't up with the times, but we'll see. But proceed with caution as well and know what's right and what's not in your na'au. But yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Well, mahalo, and I think you're touching on another question that came in is, what are the metrics or milestones for embedding these practices within the astronomy community around indigenous knowledge, informing inquiry, sort of being more than just that veneer window dressing. Do any of you have thoughts on that? The metrics and the milestones for embedding practice within scientific astronomy, but also scientific inquiry, I would say writ large.
Yeah, that's a good question. I think we have to develop them. One of the problems I see is that in terms of metrics is in the case of Mauna Kea, we have to work with state agencies, and they're not accustomed to thinking about the concepts we discussed today. It's a very different world, but we have to work within that world. It'd be an interesting project, I think, to develop metrics for personal discussions, one-on-one discussions or group discussions, as we are doing today. But I think the question is aimed at, after we finish talking today, how do we measure progress? I think that's a good project to undertake. And then a separate project would be how to work with the state agencies as and establish metrics for that. Have a discussion with the state agencies.
Mahalo, Alan. Another question too that came up in the chat is about the role of UH, the University of Hawaii, in the future of modern astronomy. Do any of you have thoughts on how you see the role of our university in the future of modern astronomy?
I can start with a few comments, and then maybe the other panelists can say something also from the Hawaiian perspective. Mauna Kea is incredibly important for astronomy on a state, national, and international level. And so there are these forces out there that we have to, that are going to be driving certain things. But what we are trying to do is find a way forward. The University of Hawaii has an astronomy program, and it has a Hawaiian studies program and Hawaiian language program. And I think ignoring the external factors outside the University of Hawaii, I think there is an important task ahead for the university to find a way to accommodate the different programs within the university in a pono way.
Just want to
I
add.
don't know if the others have, yeah, go ahead.
I thought that was the volleyball bump, but anyway, I just want to add to what Alan is saying, that, and so eloquently putting it, that those metrics and measurements could be tools that would really help to guide the university in its kuleana. And I know that there is commentary going on right now on the newest guidelines for Mauna Kea management. But when guidelines are created, it's based upon a certain perspective of certain understanding. And so for Indigenous people, we base that on our ike ku'una, our traditional knowledge, and the history that we've learned over the years and how it's impacted ourselves and our environment. So really, to be pono is to create that metric and milestones ahead of the fact of creating a plan. And you're not gonna make everybody happy all the time, but if you do it in the right order, like how the Kumulipo was developed, like how other origin stories are developed, you start with a base foundation and you have an understanding of what the hierarchical order of the natural world is. Then when you make a plan, usually the plans stick better. So that's one of the things that we hope to see for the university. And I know right now it's also on the discussion of maybe another entity, but whoever is in charge gotta really, like Alan said, take it to heart, be honest with yourself. This is what we did in the past, never worked. And then make a plan that's based on the pono approach.
I will just say that it is an interesting combination, interesting situation that we have a university with a Hawaiian studies and a astronomy department. And I think we will we should and we will all try and move towards what we each think is right. I think it's better to come to the table and discuss together. But as we discuss, I also think it's important that each of us not lose sight of who we are and what we hold dear and represent at the same time. I'll just say that.
Well, mahalo to you all. I mean, that was a tough question. And I think on that note, Bruce, you know, is there, and this is coming from the chat as well, is there any theory or mana'o that you envision for the blending of culture and science, or the creating the requisite discussions needed to continue this conversation of, you know, this university holds those perspectives within it, as well as many other organizations or members of our community. So back to the question, Kalamai, is there a theory or a mana'o that you envision that is requisite for the blending of culture and science?
I think we do have a rocky pu'upu'u road in front of us, but the very fact that a conference with a title such as this exists is a sign that this is happening and we're moving forward. Yeah, I would definitely see, as Kanoe termed it, more infiltration and more coming together in programs like Ahua Hei Noa, in not just for astronomy, but in all fields that we perceive that there's a divide between the Western or the cultural and non-cultural scientific disciplines. No, there's definitely a long road, but we're seeing progress. All of us here, all the audience members, this panel, the next 2 days are a sign that things are changing, and we'll see how that shapes. I think it needs to take its own course. We can try to plan. It's definitely good to have a plan so you can steer the ship a little bit, but I think eventually it will take its own shape on its own as well, as long as we're open-minded.
Mahalo. You know, and the last question is, you know, how can we ensure all of the work that you have all done to have engage in these conversations, stretch your comfort zones and your mind and your efforts to create things that contribute both back to continuing the mere, if you will, or continuing the kumulipo, if you will, continuing to add to our annals of ike that get passed on to generations to come, as well as contributing to and perhaps transforming the way in which I would say international astronomy engages in its inquiries. How do you ensure that the significance of this effort and of these relationships and of this conversation is carried to a wider community as discoveries take on the international scientific stage?
Well, Kaʻiu, I think you've done quite a bit of that already by speaking at astronomical meetings. I think we can do more. I think there are avenues we can pursue to get the message out, to reach more people. So I'll give that some thought and get back to you on that. But I think locally we need to find ways to involve more people into the process and establish these connections.
Definitely agree with that. I also think Ahua Hei Noa is very special. It got a lot of attention. It was very famous. I think it was a catalyst, and we definitely need more catalytic moments. But we should also remember that it's what we do every day. It's not just about making those big bang moments. It's about practicing it. It's about the research we do every single day, and the boring, monotonous things that build up and build up. Actually, they're not boring and monotonous. They're actually very interesting to all of us in all of our fields, but it's through our everyday work that it will eventually grow and get bigger with the assistance of those catalytic events that get lots of attention.
I just want to kako'o and mahalo all the mana'o that's brought here today in the panel. Like Bruce said, it's a practice. So not only practicing it at home in our daily lives, whether it's, you know, through exercises in learning how to discipline yourself, quiet your mind, be able to focus, giving yourself the time and the allowing yourself that time you need to observe what's going on, observe carefully, become a student of the world around you. But also taking those elements of practice into the workplace, and especially in a field where observation is keen, observation of the stars, but also observation of the community, and working to develop those ties so that we are supportive members of our community rather than, you know, breaking away or breaking up those ties that exist are really important. So find a way to practice, and I think Mauna Kea is a good example of where you can start to take something that was going in one direction for so long and then kind of redirect it into a pathway that all members of our community, Indigenous and non-Indigenous, language speakers, non-language speakers, cultural practitioners, non-cultural practitioners, are able to direct that mele and where we're going with it. So I hope that's what we take away from this. Start small, be consistent, and just keep plugging away at it every single day.
Mahalo nui loa ia ʻoukoʻa pau, Alan, Kanoe, Bruce, I mean Larry, I mean Doug, I haʻiʻolelo mua. Really thankful for all of your time and your sharing of knowledge and wisdom. This concludes our portion of the conference. I want to mahalo the audience and all of those questions and comments that came in the Q&A feed. We really appreciate your engagement and real thought-provoking and thoughtful feedback and questions. So me ia mau mana'o, he wahi leo mahalo keia, ia oe ho'i e moani no ka pani ana i keia. Back to you, Moani.